Hi, I'm Lenora, and this is the story of the night my sister kicked me out of her engagement party. For looking cheap, she had me seated next to the restroom, whispered that I was barely family, and smiled while doing it. What she didn't know was that a black car was already waiting for me outside, and a CEO was inside, ready to marry me on his private jet. But this isn't just about a wedding. It's about years of being erased from photos, having my name cut from guest lists, and finding out, too late, that even my mother's checks never reached me. You ever feel like your family dressed you up as the villain, just to distract from what they were really hiding? The sun had just started dipping below the tree line as I pulled up to the stately home in Highland Park. Perfectly manicured hedges framed the circular driveway, each one sculpted to architectural precision. Even the valet had a clipboard, and somehow, just the way he glanced at my car, a sensible 10-year-old Camry, told me I was already out of place. Still, I smoothed the front of my vintage dress, ivory cotton with hand-stitched lace along the collar, once my mother's and now mine by memory. It wasn't trendy or expensive, but it was honest. And as I stepped out, clutching the gift bag with trembling fingers, I reminded myself this was my sister's night, not mine. At the front entrance, the woman with the earpiece scanned the guest list. Her manicured finger slid down the tablet, then paused. "Your name again?" she asked, eyes flicking up with a practiced, tight smile. I repeated it. She hesitated. "You're not listed with a +1. I RSVP'd for 2, I said evenly. I'm afraid the final list reflects individual entries only. Family was allowed solo access. If you'd like, your guest can wait in the car. The way she said it, like I'd brought someone disposable, burned into me. I didn't argue. Instead, I gave the faintest nod and walked in alone, brushing past the fragrance of lilies and over-polished marble. Inside, I was greeted by sweeping arrangements, towering glass vases, and a string quartet playing so delicately it felt rehearsed for a magazine spread. And there, in the center of it all, was Callista. She floated across the room like a socialite in a dream, air-kissing people on both cheeks, holding her champagne like a microphone. Everything about her said, "This is the world I've built. Admire it." When she saw me, her eyes flickered, but she didn't come over. She gave me a nod, just enough to check the box of civility. I took a seat in the corner. Not one of the gold-rimmed, name-tagged ones. Those were for family, lined neatly in a row at the front. Mine was somewhere by the hallway to the kitchen, where the clatter of serving trays kept me company. As the evening unfolded, I noticed something peculiar. People kept asking who I was. One man leaned over and whispered, "Are you with catering?" Another, sipping his drink, asked if I was part of the event staff. I smiled politely, each time more faintly. The real sting came when I caught a glimpse of the slideshow looping on the projector. Family vacations, childhood birthdays, every major holiday, you name it. Dozens of pictures, all polished, color-graded. And I wasn't in a single one, not even the Easter at Grandma's where I made the pies. Not the Thanksgiving where I drove 3 hours because Callista had forgotten to pick up Mom. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. A waiter passed by, and I grabbed a glass of sparkling cider. I didn't want to drink. I just needed something to hold. Then it hit me. This wasn't about oversight. It wasn't about mistake. This was curated exclusion. Callista didn't forget to add my +1. She made sure not to. She didn't crop me out of the slideshow. She never allowed me in. I thought back to the day I mailed the RSVP. I had written our names clearly, mine and Marcus's. He was supposed to be here tonight, but he was back at the hotel, waiting, because he wasn't welcome. And it wasn't the first time. There had been other mix-ups. Dinners where she forgot to extend the invite, group vacations where my room mysteriously didn't get booked. Every time I brought up Marcus, there was a polite smile, followed by, "Oh, we'll figure something out," which we never did. I used to think she was just busy, that maybe she didn't mean it. But now, watching her laugh in a custom emerald dress, holding court like a queen, I knew better. I took a long breath and exhaled slowly. "Family isn't who invites you to the table," I murmured under my breath. "It's who pulls up a chair when you're left standing." No one noticed me saying it. No one noticed me at all. The chatter picked up. Toasts were being cued. The music shifted into something more cinematic. And somewhere, Callista began making her way toward the stage. I could have left. Part of me wanted to. But another part, the quieter, sharper part, wanted to stay. To watch. To remember. Because sometimes, when someone spends years trying to push you out of the frame, all it takes is one moment to step in and be seen. And that was before she stood up and humiliated me in front of everyone. I'd barely had time to settle into my seat when the air around me shifted, cold, stale, and sharp, like I'd wandered into a place I wasn't supposed to be. The chair creaked beneath me, tucked into a round table pressed so close to the hallway leading to the restrooms that I could hear every faucet and automatic soap dispenser sputtering behind the wall. A waiter brushed past, mumbling, "Excuse me," as he maneuvered a tray of half-empty glasses toward the kitchen. Plates clattered. Someone sneezed behind the swinging door. Every sound seemed magnified by the cheap tile beneath my feet. It wasn't the placement that struck me. It was the message. No one else sat at this table. No name card, no centerpiece, just a seat, clearly marked for someone who didn't belong. I crossed my legs, pulled the hem of my dress over my knee, and tried to make myself small, invisible, whatever it took to survive this part of the evening. From across the room, I caught the flick of someone's gaze. A woman I didn't know, glass of wine in hand, leaned toward her friend and asked, "Is she staff?" My stomach clenched. I wasn't shocked by the question. I was shocked by how easily it slipped out of her mouth, how confident she was that I couldn't possibly be a guest, much less family. Her friend shook her head but didn't correct her. They kept staring, not even pretending to be subtle. There was no other close family back here in the shadows. The rest of them, my father, cousins, uncles, aunts, they sat in the front, laughing and sipping, glancing occasionally at Callista like she were royalty. And maybe, in a way, she was. A queen of well-curated optics. You can't be humiliated by strangers unless someone you know places you there, I thought. The MC tapped the microphone. "Let's welcome the future bride, our own dazzling Callista Monroe." The applause erupted like a spark catching velvet. All heads turned forward. Mine stayed lowered. Callista took the stage with the kind of confidence that wasn't taught. It was inherited, nurtured by attention and applause. Her gown shimmered, voice soft yet polished. Her thank you speech rolled off her tongue like a brand commercial. And then, she said it. "Also, I want to give a little shout out to my sister, Lenora, who's here tonight. So glad you made it." The room clapped, politely. Not a soul turned toward me. Even Callista didn't look in my direction. I lifted my glass slowly, the bubbly now flat, and took a sip. Sometimes, family claps for you while they're cutting you out. I sat back, eyes tracing the chandeliers above, the golden trim along the ceiling, the rows of matching smiles. And then she was walking toward me. Callista, champagne in hand, smile glued in place like a news anchor mid-broadcast. "Lynn," she said, voice low and honeyed, "I told you that dress was quaint." Her smile never wavered. "Try not to make it about you tonight, okay?" My fingers tightened around my glass. The plastic stem groaned. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I just watched her walk away, her heels clicking over the marble like a warning shot. It wasn't about the dress. It never was. It was about control. How far she could push, how deep she could cut, and still smile while doing it. I turned slightly. Taking in the room from the edge, I compared it, not in luxury or lighting, but in intention. The smiles were painted, the hugs rehearsed, the kindness rationed out for photo ops and Instagram captions. None of it was real. My dress didn't blend, no, but I wore it for someone who had known what real looked like, my mother. She'd worn this same fabric to her own sister's wedding decades ago. She'd stood at the edge of a similar room and watched it all unfold. And now, here I was, wearing that history-like armor. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Instead, I started to watch. I studied. I mentally cataloged who whispered, who smirked, who avoided my eye. I listened to phrases passed between servers, jokes told too close to where they thought I couldn't hear. The whole room became a map, and I was marking it with red flags. You don't light a match in public unless you're sure it'll only burn what you no longer need. And I was very, very sure. But just when I thought I could quietly disappear, the humiliation took center stage. The clapping from Callista's toast hadn't fully faded when I slipped out of my seat and wandered toward the entrance hall. My ears still rang, not from the sound, but from the silence that followed her words. The room had moved on like nothing had happened, but something inside me hadn't. I found myself standing before a display I hadn't noticed earlier, an arrangement of framed photographs set along a linen-covered table, flanked by soft lighting and white roses. A digital slideshow flickered across the screen above it. Years of family milestones clicked past every few seconds. Summer vacations on the coast, Christmas mornings with coordinated pajamas, birthday cakes with towering candles and grinning faces. But none of them were mine. Not once did I see myself, not in the group shots, not in the candids, not even in the background. My entire existence had been airbrushed out. I leaned forward, scanning the still frames like a detective looking for any trace. There was one from the Christmas at Aunt Margaret's, the one where I drove 6 hours in the snow with a flu-ridden Marcus, just so Callista wouldn't complain about my absence. Everyone else was there. Callista, our parents, cousins, even Aunt Margaret's new schnauzer. And me? I remembered that moment. I was asked to take the picture. "Just grab the photo, Lenora. You've always had the steadiest hands," Callista had said, already positioning herself front and center. It wasn't that I didn't exist. I'd simply been removed. Erased people don't scream, they haunt. I turned away from the table, my jaw clenched. My mother's dress brushed against my legs as I moved, its familiar texture grounding me. I slipped through the back doors and out onto the patio, inhaling sharply as cool air hit my lungs. There was a bench near the edge of the lawn. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. My thumbs absent-mindedly traced the stitched edge of my sleeve. She'd given it to me in the final months. Not with ceremony, just a quiet moment while packing up her sewing things. "I wore this when I decided I'd no longer shrink to fit," she'd said, folding the fabric gently, like it was made of glass. I didn't know what she meant then, but I do now. It wasn't a fancy dress, the stitching wasn't perfect, the hemline wasn't modern, but it was real, it was honest, it was hers. The scent of lavender still clung to the collar. I remembered how her hands moved when she sewed, slow and steady, even when arthritis began to stiffen her fingers. She made this dress for herself, to wear to the kind of events she wasn't invited to anymore, but showed up for anyway. Callista used to call it homemade humility. I used to laugh along, back when I still thought Callista's cruelty was just her way of being funny. But now, sitting in the shadows of her celebration, I saw the dress for what it was, a statement, not an apology. Wearing this was never about style. It was about standing next to the ghost of the only person who ever saw me. I stood up slowly, running my palms down the front of the dress. I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I wasn't desperate to be noticed. I wasn't even angry. I was done. As I made my way back inside, I didn't avoid the eyes. I welcomed them. I watched how they flickered toward me, then away again, uncertain of where I fit in the polished picture. I saw who whispered behind napkins, who tightened their grip on their wine glasses, who gave me those polite half-smiles and looked down just a second too fast. They were painting a narrative, and I was rewriting it, one quiet step at a time. My absence from the slideshow? Not a mistake. My seat by the restroom? Not an accident. My dress? Not an oversight. Maybe they edited me out of their stories. But I'm still here, recording every line they thought I'd never repeat. And just as I found my footing again, Callista walked up and reminded me why I never truly belonged. The applause from Callista's toast hadn't completely faded when I returned to the main hall. I didn't take a seat this time. I stayed near the back, near the bar where servers whispered and guests rarely looked. My heels clicked quietly over the marble, but no one turned. The lighting had dimmed a little, giving the room that golden-hued glow every event planner swears by. Toasts were beginning, glasses clinked. Someone near the head table laughed a little too loudly. I leaned against a pillar, clutching my nearly empty glass, and tried to breathe past the knot in my chest. Lenora? It was my cousin Jeremy, harmless, usually. "Hey," I said, attempting civility. "You got the time?" he asked, fishing around his coat pocket like he'd forgotten his phone. "I left mine charging in the car." I pulled mine out of my clutch but saw it was dead. "Battery's gone. Let me check yours." He handed it over without thinking. I tapped the screen, and that's when I saw it. The group chat notification slid down the screen like a curtain call. Family Core, 9 unread messages. The most recent one from Aunt Lila read, "Let's hope she doesn't make a scene tonight." The one before that? "At least she wore beige, blends into the background." My eyes stopped on the name beside it. Dad. My thumb froze. I didn't need to read more. I handed the phone back, smiling as best I could. Jeremy thanked me and walked off, oblivious to what I had just seen. They weren't worried I'd embarrass them. They were terrified I'd finally stop disappearing. I turned, stepped away from the noise, and found the hallway toward the side patio. The air was cooler there, less perfumed. The tension I'd been holding started to shift. Less fear now, more precision. A memory pressed into me, just a few weeks back. The day my wedding gift to Callista was returned. It had been a quiet Tuesday. I was walking up to her building downtown with a wrapped canvas tucked under my arm. It was a rare vintage Parisian print, the kind our mom once showed us in a coffee table book, the kind she said she dreamed of seeing in person. I'd tracked one down for weeks. It wasn't cheap. It wasn't easy to find. But it meant something. The doorman looked confused when I stepped into the lobby. "Ms. Monroe left this for you," he said, handing me a sealed envelope. I opened it right there. Inside was a note on her company's stationery. "This doesn't match our aesthetic. Please understand." No signature. I stood on that sidewalk for 10 minutes, holding a return rejection like it was a bill I'd never expected to pay. It hadn't been about style. It was about erasing the last shared thing between us. My grip on the patio railing tightened. I could hear another round of toasts beginning, champagne glasses being passed, polite laughter. a violinist playing something light and forgettable. I stepped back inside. The room spun around Callista as if she were gravity itself. I found her standing just off stage, between photographers and a floral arch that cost more than my annual salary. She didn't see me until I was 3 feet away. "Callista," I said quietly. She turned, flashing that same TV anchor smile she reserved for fundraisers and local press. I leaned in. "You've made it very clear I don't belong here," I said, low and calm. "But don't mistake silence for surrender." She blinked, then tilted her head, lips curling just slightly. "Oh, Lenora," she said, almost laughing. "You've always loved playing the victim." I nodded once, not breaking eye contact, then turned and walked away. No one saw us, no one heard, but it was the loudest I'd ever spoken in her presence. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about survival of identity. And that was the last time I gave her the chance to stop what was coming. The glow from the chandeliers softened as the night crawled toward its last act. Toasts were winding down. Guests buzzed with gentle intoxication, the kind that made compliments flow easier and truths harder to contain. Callista stood center stage, flawless under the lights, thanking the vendors, the planners, the caterers, and of course, her beautiful family. I remained still, half shadowed by a pillar near the bar, far from the golden chairs and monogrammed menus. From my vantage point, the room felt less like a celebration and more like a campaign rally. Every smile, every touch, every Instagram caption pre-written. This wasn't joy, it was branding. A familiar voice slipped through the air beside me. "You're stronger than she gives you credit for." I turned. It was Mrs. Landers, one of my mother's oldest friends. She wasn't smiling, but her gaze held warmth. I nodded, quietly grateful. "She doesn't give me anything," I said. That's how I learned to build myself. Mrs. Landers placed her hand over mine briefly, then moved on. She understood more than I expected. Callista's final words echoed across the room. "Let's raise a glass to new beginnings, and to those who support love even if it doesn't always look the way they imagined." A polite chuckle rose, followed by the clink of flutes. That was my cue. I slipped out the side door, past the security guard who didn't bother to stop me, into the cooler air waiting outside. The evening sky was ink-stained, and the street lamps cast long, theatrical shadows onto the driveway. I tapped my phone and opened the rideshare app, but I didn't need to. A sleek black sedan was already waiting, engine humming quietly. The driver stepped out the moment I approached. "Miss Lenora?" I paused. "Yes," I answered slowly, scanning his face. It was vaguely familiar. Rowan's driver. Discreet, always punctual, never nosy. "Mr. Rowan asked me to be on standby since 7 p.m., he said, holding the door open. I slid into the back seat. The leather interior wrapped around me like armor. My heart pounded not from surprise, but from clarity. He knew. He didn't know the details, but he knew tonight would be the line I'd never step back over. My phone lit up. "Rowan, if tonight's the night, I'm wheels up and waiting. Let's rewrite this ending." I looked at the driver in the mirror. "Private terminal?" I asked. He nodded. "Your luggage has already been handled." I blinked. Of course it had. I rested my head against the window as the car pulled out of the driveway. Inside, the party would go on. Callista would make another entrance. Someone would tell a joke about me being emotional. And they'd all pretend nothing had shifted. But it had. I had. There was no fight, no explosion, just one decision. As we drove through the city, past flickering gas stations and closed boutiques, I caught my reflection in the window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look like someone waiting for permission. I didn't look broken. I looked done, not defeated, resolved. The ache in my chest had settled into something still and solid, a weight that no longer dragged, it anchored. My dress was wrinkled, my makeup was fading, but none of it mattered. Dignity isn't loud, it's the way you walk away when they expect you to beg. And as the city lights faded behind me, I finally understood what freedom in silence felt like. The plane sat waiting under soft runway lights, its sleek body glinting like a whisper no one was supposed to hear. As the car slowed beside the private terminal, the driver stepped out, opening my door before I could even gather my bag. The moment I stepped onto the tarmac, I felt the weight of the past 2 hours roll off my shoulders like fog clearing from glass. Inside the terminal, everything was quiet. No velvet ropes, no name checks, no coordinated smiles, just 2 uniformed staff, polite to the edge of reverent. "Good evening, Ms. Lenora," one of them said. "Mr. Rowan is aboard." I nodded, offering a faint smile. My shoes tapped softly over the pristine floor, far more forgiving than the polished drama I'd just left behind. The jet door opened as I approached, and Rowan stood at the top of the steps, one hand tucked in his pocket, the other holding a glass of wine. I didn't speak until I reached him. He handed me the glass, kissed my cheek. No theatrics, no announcements, just the kind of steady presence that reminded me why I said yes to him in the first place. Inside, the space was warm, minimal. Cream leather, walnut trim, not a trace of gold leaf or scripted initials in sight. On a table beside the window, I noticed a row of small place cards, 10 in all. Each name belonged to someone who mattered, his oldest friend from business school, a cousin he practically raised, a mentor who taught him to build, not inherit. Mine was there too, of course, but not hers. I ran my finger along the edge of an empty card. "You didn't invite her," I said softly. Rowan didn't hesitate. "Everyone who needed to know is already here. Everyone who needed to be left out was." The words didn't land with cruelty. They landed like logic. I sank into the seat across from him and stared out the window, watching a baggage cart roll by in the distance. "This is different," I whispered. No photographers, no peonies dyed to match the linens. "No illusion," he said. I turned back to him. "Real wealth doesn't raise its voice," I murmured. "It makes room." He smiled faintly and reached for his laptop. "I have something you should see." He opened the screen and clicked into a folder labeled simply, "Coverage." The first file was video footage from earlier that night, discreet, angled from above the main ballroom. My heart ticked faster as I watched the familiar silhouettes move across the frame. There was Callista, head tilted, glass lifted, delivering her closing toast. Then the camera zoomed in just enough to catch her when she stepped down, voice dropping low. "She actually showed up in that dress," she muttered to someone off camera. What did she think this was, her redemption arc? The next clip showed her laughing, then rolling her eyes as she waved off a cousin trying to say something in my defense. "I wanted to see how they treat you when they think no one's watching," Rowan said quietly. I nodded, letting the footage play. It didn't hurt, not anymore. It confirmed what I already knew. "She made her choice," I whispered. We sat in silence for a while. The engines began to hum. Staff walked through once, then twice, checking everything with calm efficiency. No one interrupted. No one hovered. Eventually, Rowan stood and motioned toward the aisle. "Everything's ready." There were no towering flower walls, no garland-wrapped arch, just a small wooden table near the cabin window, where a narrow box held 2 sheets of handwritten vows. I stepped toward the table and ran my hand across the surface. The grain was smooth, unvarnished, honest. He gestured toward my dress, the one I'd worn to the party. I didn't bring a change, I said. He shook his head. That one's enough. It carried you through their worst. Let it carry you through your best. I blinked once, inhaled slowly. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel like I was being looked at. I felt seen. And then the door closed behind us, and we rose above the city that once tried to bury me. Somewhere over the Rockies, the sky outside our window shifted from inky black to a hue caught between night and dawn. I sat wrapped in a wool shawl, one hand around a mug of Earl Grey, the other resting on my lap. Rowan sat across from me, quietly reviewing a few final details with the officiant, his old friend, a retired judge who had officiated only 3 weddings in his lifetime. Ours would be the 4th. There was no music, no aisles, no guest book with gold-embossed lettering. Just a dozen people who mattered, each seated comfortably with a glass in hand, no expectations beyond sincerity. I took in the small, curated details of the cabin, a modest floral arrangement on the side table, vows handwritten in the same notebook Rowan and I once used to trade weekend recipes and doodles. My heart was steady, not pounding. My breathing matched the gentle thrum of the jet. I wasn't escaping, I thought, staring at the clouds below. I was ascending. When it was time, Rowan stood first. He didn't reach for my hand immediately. He waited, let me come forward on my own. And when I did, there wasn't a moment of doubt. The officiant began with a simple acknowledgement of time, of distance, of choosing peace over performance. No one took photos. There were no speeches about how we made it or overcame odds. Just stillness, presence. I wore the same dress I had worn to Callista's party, still wrinkled at the sleeves, the hem stained faintly from champagne. I didn't need silk or satin. This dress had already survived more than any designer gown ever could. Luxury, Rowan once told me, is never louder than truth. When it was my turn, I unfolded my vows with fingers that no longer trembled. I've spent so much of my life being framed out of the picture, I began, but you never asked me to fit your frame. You just held the space open until I stepped in. He smiled, and in that moment I knew we were rewriting something far more lasting than any inheritance or family myth. Later, while everyone settled into soft conversation and laughter, Rowan poured us 2 small glasses of champagne and led me to the back of the jet, where a quieter alcove offered a panoramic view of the horizon. I never told you, he said, but 2 years ago, I tried to formally introduce myself to your family. I looked up, startled. I'd made an appointment through your father's assistant. I showed up with a tie, a bottle of wine, the works, he added with a wry smile. But when I arrived, your sister's assistant met me at the gate. What did she say? He paused. Family doesn't entertain casuals, she said. Then she shut the gate. My lips parted, but no words came. I didn't tell you because it didn't change anything, he said. I didn't need to be known for how I was dismissed. I'd rather be remembered for how I stayed. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel surprise. All I felt was certainty that the person I'd chosen had seen every shadow and stayed anyway. What they shut out, you welcomed, I murmured. What they mocked, you protected. Rowan touched his glass to mine. On paper, you carry my name now, but you were whole before me. This is just the part where the world catches up. We clinked softly. Outside, the first light of morning tipped the clouds in rose and silver. And while I celebrated in the clouds, Callista was just beginning to fall from grace. The jet touched down just after sunrise. By the time we rolled through the private gate at the small terminal outside Chicago, my phone had buzzed 6 times in rapid succession. At first, I thought it was just Rowan's assistant confirming our hotel check-in, or maybe a delayed message from the pilot. But then the seventh alert hit. Rowan looked over from his seat, phone already in hand. "You might want to open yours," he said, his voice unusually even. I glanced down. 5 unread texts, 3 missed calls, a direct message with a screenshot, then another, and another. His assistant's name popped up next. "You need to see what's trending." I opened the first article. "Billionaire CEO marries mystery bride on private jet." The headline blinked against a sea of commentary. The image below was blurry, taken from across a terminal window, but unmistakable. Me, in the same dress Callista had mocked hours before, standing beside Rowan, smiling. Lit by the overhead cabin lights like a scene from a movie no one saw coming, Rowan handed me his phone. "There's more," I scrolled. Another image, clearer this time. A bystander had caught us leaving the jet, my hand in Rowan's. My face not quite turned toward the camera, but enough to be recognized by anyone who knew me, or anyone who'd been told I was irrelevant. "Wait, isn't that Callista's sister?" screamed one headline. The comment sections were already alive. "That dress looks better in a jet than by the restrooms. Plot twist of the year. You love to see it." I sat back in the seat, not stunned, just still. There was a kind of justice in it, the kind that didn't scream or seek permission. It simply existed, undeniable. Meanwhile, in Dallas, Callista was hosting a brunch, a catered, press-friendly affair to cement her image recovery post-engagement. She was mid-toast, raising her mimosa, when her assistant leaned over and whispered something. A phone was handed to her, the screen lighting up with headlines she hadn't authorized, coverage she hadn't curated. She scrolled, first fast, then slower. One of the guests leaned over. "Didn't you say she was still single?" Callista smiled through her teeth, but her hands shook. Her voice faltered on the next line. Back in our hotel suite, Rowan poured coffee while I scrolled through another alert. A TikTok had surfaced. From the party, I tapped play. The clip began with Callista's voice, sharp and clear over ambient music. "Don't embarrass me. You're barely family," she hissed, turning from me at the reception hall. Then the video cut to footage of me boarding the private jet. Same dress, same person, different energy. The caption read, "Guess who's actually winning?" By noon, the video hit 4 million views. Comments rolled in faster than I could read them. That sister's energy. 100% toxic. The quiet ones always win. We need more Lenoras in this world. One user posted, "You can't PR your way out of the truth anymore." It was reposted thousands of times. I didn't reply. I didn't even double tap. I set the phone down and looked out the window as the city below stretched awake. Somewhere in that skyline, my name was finally mine again. Not edited, not silenced, not brushed aside for optics. I wasn't trending because I chased attention. I was trending because I walked away and let the truth speak louder than I ever needed to. And just like that, the sister who erased me became the punchline in her own performance. Exactly 1 week after the video went viral, I was folding laundry in silence when my phone rang. It was Aunt Helen. "I need you to come by," she said. Her voice was steady, but the kind of steady people use when they've been holding something in too long. "Your mother left something. Said it was only to be shared. When the time felt right." The drive to Helen's house took just under 40 minutes. It was the kind of quiet suburban home where nothing had changed since 1998. The mailbox still rusted at the edges, the porch swing creaking softly in the wind. Inside, everything smelled like lavender sachets and lemon polish. She led me to her study and pointed to a small fireproof safe in the corner. From it, she pulled a flash drive and an envelope with my name written in my mother's hand. Steady, slanted, familiar. We didn't speak as she slid the flash drive into the laptop and hit play. The screen flickered. Then, my mother appeared. She looked older than I remembered in her final years. Her hair was tucked back, skin pale but calm. She was seated in her favorite armchair, the one with the faded blue stripes and worn cushions that once held me during childhood fevers and teenaged heartbreaks. "If you're watching this," she began, "it means the family's no longer pretending to protect you." I felt the weight of her words before I even understood them. "You were never invisible to me, Lenora. They didn't forget you. They filtered you out. And I'm sorry for every time I stayed silent to keep the peace that wasn't worth preserving." She paused, swallowing. "This family, it rewards loudness, performance, control. But you were the daughter who stayed when no one applauded. That is love. And that deserves legacy." She explained her will, how she left specific assets to me directly, including her journals, her small property in Galveston, and a collection of letters no one else knew about. Then came her closing line. "You have nothing to prove, but if ever they force your hand, this is your receipt." The screen faded to black. I sat there for a long time before Aunt Helen quietly pushed a folder toward me. "There's more." Inside were estate documents, originals. In them, I saw what I hadn't known to ask about, several checks issued in my name years ago. Amounts that would have helped when I was scraping together rent during grad school, or when Marcus and I nearly missed a mortgage payment after the miscarriage. "None of these ever reached me," I whispered. Helen frowned. "Because they were intercepted." The records showed the trail, check numbers, issuance dates. The back signatures didn't match mine, but they bore a striking resemblance to someone else's cursive flair, Callista. "She told me once," Helen added softly, "that she was protecting your pride. Said you'd feel insulted if your mom tried to buy you out of bitterness." I didn't believe it then. I believe it even less now. My stomach twisted, not from surprise, but from a kind of tired confirmation. I hadn't imagined it. The empty silences, the missing support, the way opportunities slipped away and no one batted an eye. I took the folder and left that day with one decision: not to sue, not yet. At my attorney's office later that week, he looked up from the documents and said, "We could build a case, forgery, fraud, intentional interference. You'd win." "I'm not interested in courtroom victory," I replied. "I want records. I want history preserved, just in case." "This isn't revenge. This is record-keeping." He nodded once, and we moved on. That weekend, I returned to the house I grew up in. It was still empty, left unsold after Mom's passing, too emotionally loaded for anyone to deal with. The air inside was thick with dust and disuse, but also with memory. I walked through each room slowly, pausing at door frames, running my hands over chipped paint and faded photographs. In my old bedroom, I pinned a printed still from the video to the bulletin board. It was a freeze frame of Mom, mid-sentence, hand raised slightly, her eyes locked on the camera. Below it, in permanent marker, I circled her closing words. "That is love." Then I locked the house behind me, and as I closed the door one last time, Callista was opening something she couldn't control. A week after the video storm, I received an official letter from the church in Waco. It was a printed invitation, not digital, sealed in cream-colored linen stationery. My name, Lenora, was spelled perfectly in cursive, and beneath it, a note from the pastor. "Your mother requested your presence here personally, should she pass." It wasn't from Callista. She hadn't reached out, not once. The memorial was held at the chapel where our mother had once sung alto in the choir every other Sunday. Nothing lavish, just polished pews, worn hymnals, and sunlight filtered through stained glass that shimmered across the floor like old secrets. Rowan and I arrived early. He wore gray instead of black, a subtle rebellion against the standard script. I wore a navy dress, simple, quiet, mine. As we stepped inside, heads turned. I caught a whisper to my left, 2 rows back. "That's her, the one from the jet." I didn't flinch. I nodded softly at the usher and moved toward an empty seat near the front. The pew behind me stayed unusually still, breaths held just a second too long. When Callista entered, dressed in designer black, heels clicking softly on the tile, she froze for a beat. Her face didn't break, but her eyes did that quick, sharp scan of the room that betrayed her. She hadn't expected me. Or maybe she had, but not like this. She recovered fast. As the service began, a slideshow played on a modest projector. Photos from Mom's youth, her college days, her first classroom, and finally, images of us as children. I appeared in several, most likely ones Mom had chosen herself. No edits, no filters, just us. Then Callista was called up to speak. She took the stage like it was a boardroom pitch, paper in hand, voice smooth. "My mother taught me to value grace and strength and loyalty," she began. "Even when it was hard, even when some people forgot what those words really meant." A pause. And the implication hung in the air like smoke, deliberate, calculated. Some heads turned toward me, some didn't. A few shifted in their seats. The energy changed, not against me, but against the performance. It didn't feel like tribute. It felt like a warning. I stayed still. Let her speak. She continued for a few more minutes, highlighting charity work, childhood memories, and then stepped back down. The applause was quiet, polite, distant. The pastor returned to the pulpit. "Before we close, Mrs. Whitmore prepared a final message. She asked it be played only today." He pressed a button. The projector buzzed, and then my mother's voice filled the room. She sat in her garden, sunlight behind her, wearing a scarf I remembered folding with her during her chemo treatments. "If you're listening," she began, "then I've gone on. And if you're still here, that means you care enough to show up. So thank you." She looked off screen for a moment, then back. "Family isn't who praises you in public, it's who protects you in silence." Her eyes softened. "There are people in this room who know exactly what that means, and there are people in this room who needed to hear it." The screen faded. Silence held for several seconds. Then a slow wave of shifting eyes, murmured exhales, and 1 or 2 looks directly toward Callista. Blank, unblinking. I didn't need to speak. I stood after the service, shook hands, offered quiet nods to guests who now looked at me differently, not with pity, but with clarity. Rowan leaned in and whispered, "They saw you this time. All of you." "I didn't come to win," I said. "I came to remember who I was." We stepped outside together into the late afternoon light. But Callista wasn't done. And the price of pride was still waiting to be paid. It was close to midnight in Chicago when the knock came. Rowan had already turned in. I was still in the kitchen, rinsing out a mug and staring at nothing in particular, the quiet of the apartment finally matching the quiet in my head. The memorial was over. The public spectacle had ended. I had said everything I needed to say without uttering a word, or so I thought. The knock came again, 3 slow, uneven taps. I opened the door to find Callista standing there. She looked nothing like the version of herself the world was used to seeing. Her coat hung loose, her shoes didn't match, and her mascara was smudged into the fine lines beneath her eyes. Her lips trembled slightly, though she was trying her best to appear composed. "They froze everything," she said, voice low, clipped. "Bank accounts? Cards?" My attorney's retainer bounced. I said nothing. She looked past me into the apartment, then back again. I don't know where else to go. The air between us held history, heavy, jagged history. I stepped back, not far, just enough. You can come in, I said, but only for the night. She nodded and entered like someone crossing a border they knew they didn't belong in anymore. I handed her a towel and a bottle of water. She sat on the couch, curled her arms around herself like she was bracing for impact. I know you think I deserve this, she muttered. I don't think, I said. I know. She flinched, but I didn't stop. You watched me get erased, dismissed, laughed at, and you helped do it. So no, I don't think you deserve sympathy. But I know what it's like to have nowhere else to go. She inhaled shakily. Brandon's under federal investigation. The IRS came to the office. I didn't even know what he was hiding. She paused, looked at me fully for the first time, and whispered, You won. Is that what you wanted? I sat across from her, arms folded, voice even. I didn't want to win. I wanted to survive. Her eyes watered, but she blinked hard and looked away. I stood up. You can have the guest room. I don't care if you cry in there or scream into the pillow, but you don't get to rewrite this narrative. Not tonight. She nodded slowly. I'm not here because I forgot, I added. You're here because I remember what mercy feels like. A long silence followed. I started to walk away, but she stopped me. Will you ever forgive me? I turned. My voice didn't waver. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's deciding to stop bleeding for what you already survived. She didn't respond, just sank deeper into the couch. I walked to my room and shut the door behind me. Inside, Rowan stirred, half awake. Everything okay? She showed up. He blinked. You let her in? For now. He reached for my hand in the dark. You don't owe her anything. I lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow, lazy circles. No, I said softly, but I owe myself a life without bitterness. And in the stillness of that night, I realized peace isn't when they apologize. It's when I no longer need them to. When the invitation arrived, it came from the new sponsor, not Callista. A formal gala to benefit one of Dallas's better-known foundations, an event that, by all rights, should have been hers to headline. It was supposed to mark her comeback, reintroduce her to the circles that had begun to whisper, distance, erase. The envelope was thick, embossed, impersonal. The email that followed, however, was not. I saw your video, the strength, the poise. We'd be honored if you'd attend. It read. No mention of Callista, no apology either, just an acknowledgement. I said yes, not to reclaim anything. I wasn't interested in reclaiming what had never truly belonged to me. I said yes because some circles don't close until you walk through them. The night of the gala, Rowan and I arrived just after 8. The ballroom was candlelit and gold-trimmed. The kind of room that dimmed the edges of shame if you had enough money to pretend it didn't exist. I stepped inside, and silence followed like an obedient dog. She's here, someone whispered. That's the one from the jet, from the video. I didn't look around. I didn't need to. You know when the air changes, when it thickens, not with judgment, but recognition. Rowan led me to our table. Guests, people I hadn't spoken to in years, some who'd once sided with Callista without hesitation, started migrating toward us, not out of loyalty, not even curiosity, but gravity. Callista was already on stage when I entered. She stood behind a lucite podium, every detail of her outfit curated to erase fragility. Black velvet, diamond studs, hair pulled tight. She began to speak, voice smooth, practiced. But midway through her speech, she stumbled. We all fall. But Only some rise, she said, eyes scanning the crowd, and that's when she saw it. The chair. It sat at our table, untouched, with a single place card in calligraphy that read, "Reserved, for those who learn." She didn't address it. Her mouth twitched like it wanted to form a rebuttal, but no words came. A woman 2 rows from the stage turned to her friend and said, just loud enough, "That's grace, that's leadership." Callista's hands gripped the podium tighter. She finished the speech, barely, and stepped down, her heels quieter than I remembered. I didn't speak that night. I didn't need to. I greeted the host, thanked the servers, shook hands, smiled. But I gave no speech, no rebuttal. The room had already decided. As Rowan and I made our way toward the exit, I turned once, not out of nostalgia, but to confirm what I already sensed. Callista stood near the bar, watching, not with resentment, not with admiration either, just realization. And that was enough. I didn't need the mic. I had the room. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave the chair empty.